Welcome to Culture Talk. Today's topic is Globalization Killing Languages? We're here with Moran and Lenore Crandall. Would you mind introducing yourself?
So my name is Lenore Crandall. I'm a linguist at the University of Chicago. I specialize in the study of language endangerment and language vitality. I do my own research in Siberia, where I work with languages that are being lost to Russian. I also work in Greenland, where I work with a language called Kalaallisut, and I work in general. I do a lot of field work in the Arctic, so that's my specialization. But I look at the issues of language endangerment, language vitality more globally.
If you search globalization and language on Google, one of the things that comes up in a lot of articles on languages is this statement: there are 6,000 languages used now, and within this century, half of them will be gone. Do you agree with that statement?
I think that that's probably very likely. We don't know exactly how many languages there are. Most linguists would probably put it closer to 7,000, but we're definitely losing a lot. People are stopping to speak them. Some of that's being offset by something we've noticed in the last few decades, but it's increasing momentum among communities to hang on to their language, to revitalize it, to find new ways to keep it alive. So people are pushing back against it, and I think we will lose probably half of the languages is a conservative estimate.
Is the wide use of English killing off other languages? Is it English, or is it simply globalization? Or are those synonymous with each other?
I think that English is a factor. As we see, if you imagine a small community with English as a global language, then there's a lot of socioeconomic pressure to learn English. The indigenous language kind of gets lost in the shuffle. There's no reason in terms of the human brain that would be the case, but these social pressures and economic pressures push towards English. So definitely English is the international global lingua franca now. There's a lot of pressure from English to learn that and not the other language.
Historically, there's been other lingua francas. For example, French may have been a language used between countries. They said that was a language of diplomacy. Could we parallel those historical movements with what's going on today? Or have we reached some age of technology where we really can't compare it to any past lingua francas like Latin or whatnot?
I think that the spread, because of technology, the spread of English is much greater than anything we've ever seen historically. Right now I'm speaking to you from Morocco in English. We couldn't have done that when French was the world's lingua franca. Mm-hmm. So technology has made it possible for a language to spread in unprecedented ways.
Do you think as the world economies become closer, like with China economically in terms of size surpassing the U.S., do you think there's a chance that English could lessen in importance?
I think it'll be very interesting to watch and see what happens. Right now, the trend is all towards English. We don't see a trend for people to learn Mandarin or any kind of Chinese variety to do international commerce. That might happen. It's really hard to say. The population size certainly suggests that it will, but that hasn't been happening.
How can we motivate people to learn other languages that have a very small population of users?
I think there's at least two very different groups there. Are you motivating people who are part of that small population? Then that tends to come from with the community itself.
Like a cultural survivalist movement, but does it necessarily mean that outsiders need to learn it to preserve it?
No, and I think people back away from the use preserve because that tends to have a connotation of a museum piece kind of sense of language, and language is constantly evolving and changing. What we're finding in the Arctic, and I think in other places, is that it's actually people your age who are reclaiming their language. They want their language back, even if they don't speak it. They go to great efforts to learn it, and they want their children to speak it. So the motivation seems to come from themselves.
Korean is my second language, and I spent about 6 years studying it. And then Moran is really good at learning other languages, but what she noticed is she couldn't learn Korean the same way that she learned English.
In terms of learning a language, the closer the language you're learning is to your first language, the easier it is for you.
Do you have any advice for Moran who's struggling to learn a language that's totally different than the languages that she learned in Europe that have a totally different root?
I don't know if I have any good advice. It depends on what kind of language learner you are. But for me, I usually need to reach some sort of basic level in the language and then go to a place where those languages are spoken and where you're forced to use it all the time with lots of people. And then after an initial point of burning out and crashing and being very miserable, then I can come through and speak better. To get back to endangered languages, that's one of the challenge for those communities. So if you want to speak a language that's not really being spoken, it's really hard. So it'd be easier to learn Korean.
You said that learning a language at a high level helps to understand the culture, but I think it also works on the opposite way, that learning the culture helps to learn the language. I think my difficulties comes a little bit from that, because there are parts of the culture with which I'm not really comfortable to, especially gender roles.
Yeah.
So I cannot really identify myself to the way Korean women speak, because sometimes I find it really too girly, and that's not really my personality, and so that's kind of hard for me to accept that. And I think that maybe it's a part of a part of my problem of learning the language. Maybe I have some like cultural barriers, and that's also what creates me all those difficulties in the language.
I think what you're saying speaks to the fact that language and culture are just completely intertwined, and when you separate them, it's very hard. I know that for myself and for lots of linguists who spend time learning languages and working in places, you need to find one where the culture resonates with you.
To repeat the title of this episode, the question is globalization killing languages?
Well, I don't like to use the word killing because that's so dramatic, but certainly globalization is having a negative effect on languages, yes.
And do you look optimistically about the future, or do you see it very bleak?
I'm more optimistic now than I was 5 or 10 years ago. I've been really impressed by the number of people who are engaged in some sort of language revitalization. I think that some languages will be revitalized and some will fall by the wayside. Okay.
All right, everybody, that was episode 4 of Culture Talk. Please make sure to subscribe below to our YouTube channel right here, and also access our other social media, Instagram, Facebook, etc., etc. idigculture.com. Okay, see you next time. Goodbye.